Mr. Makhathini.
Good afternoon.
Am I right?
Yes, you're right.
Good afternoon, Mr. Makhathini. Welcome to the panel of Communications Portfolio Committee. You are welcome, sir, and if you can briefly, within 5 minutes from now, tell us about yourself and why did you choose to apply for this post, SABC board, and maybe tell us if there are issues as a person that can compromise you, like the issues of conflict of interest in the sector and all of that, so that when members raise issues, you are not shocked, because we do a thorough check of each and every one. So you are free to share with us whatever may be a problem when members listen to you or when members ask questions. If I can have the clock here, it's 5 minutes. You'll do that in 5 minutes, and then after that it will be questions, and then at the end, if you have questions to members, you are free to raise those questions. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. My name is Bongumusa Makhathini. I was born and raised in rural of KwaZulu-Natal in Bangini. Qualification-wise, I hold a master's degree from University of Johannesburg. I also have a general management program qualification from Harvard. I have a BA honors in geography and business management, and I have a diploma in HR and a degree in teaching, BPED. In terms of my work experience, my first job, I worked for the University of Zululand as a student development officer. At the same time, I was a part-time lecturer. That exposed me to the value education can play in transforming lives of people. After working for the university for about a year, I got a job with a company called Accenture. I worked for Accenture for about 8 years. At Accenture, I was responsible for strategy work, where you help companies design strategies that can help drive efficiencies. I also did process re-engineering kind of work, which is about optimizing operations. I also did work around general consulting, which is high-value consulting. In that time, it allowed me an opportunity to learn a lot about project management, value creation, cost optimization, and really helping clients run efficient and effective businesses. After that, I was then approached by SAB to come and be a head of program management and strategy for them. I did that work for about 12 to about 16 months, and then I was promoted to become the head of public policy. After that, I was then appointed director of corporate affairs. In my tenure at SAB, I got an opportunity to work in an environment of highly regulated industry, which allowed me an opportunity to learn compliance issues, helped me to be able to design strategies that lead to commercial value for businesses. I did that work for about 6 years. I was with SAP for about 6 years. I engaged a lot with government. I engaged a lot with other private companies. And at that time, I also served in an SAB board as a director. I was also responsible for representing SAB at the industry level. We have an organization that manages affairs of the liquor industry. At the time, I was a member. I then resigned from SAB after being with them for 6 years to join a company called British American Tobacco, where I'm the director of legal and external affairs. So in my life in corporate, I've learned a number of things around compliance, commercialization, making sure that businesses are able to run in a most cost-effective manner, and that's been my experience. Why I'm keen on this opportunity, if you look at my profile, I've worked in the education space. I started teaching. After that, I worked in an IT environment. When I was working for Accenture, we did systems work, which basically exposed me to what value IT can bring to companies and organizations. Actually, when I was doing my master's with UJ, I did a thesis. My thesis was on the alignment of IT with business strategies, because I am of the view that if IT is leveraged correctly, it generates a lot of value, it saves a lot of cost, and it can drive sustainable growth for businesses. And looking at where SABC is and the challenges that SABC faces as an organization, there is a lot SABC can do in driving education, which is part of their mandate. Also, if you look at the challenges that they've been faced with around compliance issues, maladministration, disregard of compliance, and issues that they are required to adhere to, I am of the view that I can add a lot of value in that space because I've had opportunities to do that at a very high level. I mean, I also sit in the board of British American Tobacco, which is a global company. SAB Miller was also a global company. So I've had exposure to how these businesses run, and I believe I can be of value and I can assist SABC as a South African to really make a difference, because I am of the view that complaining and making comments about what is not working and not willing to roll up your sleeves and contribute based on what you've learned is also not a disservice to our country.
Thank you very much. There you are, members. The candidate is explained. Can I start with Honorable Kalago? Where is water here?
Thank you, Chair. Siyabonga ke babu ba uthe wabona uba nawe ungazama uthatha inxaxheba apha ke kule ekulungiseni umzantsi. My questions, Chair, is just to your understanding or your knowledge on of pieces of legislation which govern this sector of broadcasting, especially in as far as SABC is concerned. Firstly, your understanding of a Broadcasting Act. Secondly, you know that I'm sure you have been following what happened to the board, which was previous to this, precisely because of other elements of flouting rules and roles, and also of corruption. So, given that have been the issue around SABC, what would you differently do in order to ensure a long-term sustainability of the corporation? Also, if you can just give us, just taking from the Constitution, what areas there deal with specifically with broadcasting and how broadcasting and media must actually, especially broadcasting, I'm concentrating on that, must behave. And also your understanding of Public Finance Management Act as related to the issues I've raised, corporate King 3-4 codes of government, and also the other complementary policies, which like the board charter, like the memorandum of incorporation, just your understanding, what roles are they allocating to each, where there is a stakeholder, where there is a board, and where there is the executives. Because you have those three players when it comes to, which are major when it comes to SABC. And also, I would want it, maybe as a closing, Chair, to your opinion on the relationship between the board and the minister in particular. Should the minister impose his or her views or her give instructions to the board on what it must do? And should the board on its other side just tell the minister, now you can jump out of the window were not doing that. So if you can give me just your opinions on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Let me start by saying I will not claim to be an expert in broadcasting, but what I bring here is the understanding of corporate based on my experience and where I've worked. But to try and answer some of the issues that you've raised, in terms of what I will do or I bring or I will propose to be done differently from a board perspective, when I went through the documents, there was a total neglect of the role of the board in terms of holding the executives accountable of SABC. And that was the first thing that for me stood out. But secondly, there were instances where the board was expected to hold the executive accountable and ensure that there is consequences for wrongdoing. Say, for an example, not adhering to procurement policies, not adhering to HR policies, not adhering to guidelines in terms of finances, how finances needed to be utilized. And reality is we should have consequences for wrongdoing. And that's what, in my view, lacked. But the second thing is to ensure that as the board, you play your role and you don't interfere with the day-to-day running of the business. I mean, when I was reading the CEO that ran SABC in the 2000, I think it was 2000 to 2005, Peter McLaren, he spoke about the board having its nose in the business, but its hands are not allowed to interfere with the business. So basically, you've got to make sure that you play an oversight role, you watch how things are done, you also make sure that you've got an understanding of what needs to be done, but you don't have to interfere with the day-to-day running of the institution. Constitutionally, there are elements of the Constitution that talks about every member of the public having access to information and making sure that at the end of the day, we are empowered and we're able to leverage public broadcaster like an SABC to understand what's happening in our country. There is also an expectation sitting, for an example, with the Broadcasting Act around deepening our democracy, making sure that you drive education, making sure that you ensure that at the end of the day, there is also a commercial agenda which must be balanced with the agenda that talks to being a public broadcaster. Those elements, for me, are the things that needs to be really entrenched and nurtured correctly. So you asked me a question around what governs what SABC does. There is ICASA, which in my view is there as a regulator for how things must be done from a communication space. I mean, they've just issued a piece of an amendment now to look at whether there are any competitive issues when you talk to pay TV and issues of that nature. And when you got to the issue where, for an example, there was an interference from editorial freedom, at some point there was a decision taken not to flight or show violent kind of scenes. And ICASA basically made a ruling on that to say that was unconstitutional and it doesn't align with the ICASA rules and what govern what SABC needs to do. And the question around King 3 talk about clear accountability. And this is where, at some point, the Minister of Communication wanted to sort of like interfere under the pretense that she wanted to make sure that she holds the management of SABC accountable. But that accountability and that role is a prerogative of the board. The ministry is responsible for policy setting, but the board is the one that is accountable, or needs to provide a strategic guidelines or guidance in terms of what needs to be done. Of course, the MOI will talk about who's responsible for what. One of the amendments that, for an example, I read about is where the ministry wanted, for an example, to replace some of the duties that are done by the National Assembly, which basically meant, for an example, the process we're going through now where we're getting nominated.
A second left. Left with a second.
Okay. So in terms of the segregation of duties really is to ensure that the board plays an oversight role, management runs the day-to-day running of the business.
Thank you. Honorable Tsede.
Afternoon, Mr. Makhathini. How are you?
I'm good, thank you for asking.
I'm tempted to ask you a question by mere looking at what you are saying in your CV. Bongumusa is an ardent fundraiser able to mobilize resources towards the achievement of set goals. And I'm tempted to ask you a question around the funding model of the regulator and the SABC. Mechanisms that you will put in place to ensure that that funding model is realized.
Thank you.
Maybe let me take it further so that I don't come back. What, in your view, should be the relationship between the SABC and the regulator? What is the current state of affairs? And if appointed a board member, how do you see yourself improving this kind of a state of affairs that you are going to be alluding to? The last one, digital migration. Your understanding of digital migration and what does it mean to the SABC? Thanks.
Fundraising for me, there's one quick thing that I've learned in corporate. Numbers in corporate in terms of customers translate to money, translate to value. So if you look at, for example, SABC, they've got Ukozi FM with over 7 million listeners. They've got Umhlobo Wenene sitting at about 5 million, around about 12 million listeners. And in my view, we should find ways to leverage those numbers to generate value. In terms of, for example, working hard to get content that is interesting, and also working with corporates around, for example, production, because in my assessment and in the work that I've done when I was with SAB, you find that SABC only sell airtime, but production of programs, like the program we ran around discouraging underage drinking, was produced somewhere else, only came to SABC to be flighted. In my view, things like that can be done in-house to generate more money. Secondly, there's a lot of things that businesses are interested in, educating their customers. So those education programs, a lot of them can be produced and be run through SABC. They've lost things like, for example, boxing, flighting of boxing, soccer. All of those things, for me, can be well-housed, being done under SABC. So with my expertise and what I've learned, we'll basically look at what the value, because the first thing we need to do is to package the value that you can sell. Once you've packaged the value, then you can be able to sort of price it. And from that perspective, people will be willing to pay for the value that they get. And that's how businesses do. We make a product, we create value, and people are willing to pay the price based on the quality of the product. That's what I will focus on. The second question was around SABC relationship with the regulator. The regulator is there to regulate us. In my work experience, I had DTI regulating me when I was in the liquor space. When you get a license, there are conditions of that license. You've got to respect those conditions. You've got to respect what the prescript or what is required of you. So currently the relationship is not very good, because sometimes whenever regulators come with certain judgment or make certain comments about things that needed to be corrected, there was a total neglect or ignoring totally what came out of, from the regulator side. And that, for me, is not sustainable. We've got to fix that relationship and make sure that we adhere to the conditions of our license. The next question was about digital migration. Digital migration is very important for SABC long-term sustainability. In this sense, currently they've got 3 channels, actually 4. Digital migration, for me, from my understanding, will result to about 16 channels that can be available. And more channels will mean, for example, will be able to be relevant at provincial level. We can actually have content that is customized or tailor-made for different provinces, allowing more languages to be visible, and creating more opportunities and job opportunities. The second thing that will allow us to do with a digital migration is that the current spectrum that we have can be leveraged for other things. It can be sold, for example, to the network companies like your MTN, your Vodacom, to improve connectivity at a different level. And if you look at where technology is going, it is important for us to migrate because it will be cost effective, but at the same time, it will make SABC more accessible and really be of help to drive some of the things that we haven't been able to really bring home for the general public.
Thank you. That was Honorable Tseti. Honorable Tolashe.
Honorable Member, is this Mr. Makhathini? I'm quite impressed with the knowledge that you have. However, if you can please speak to the actual sector insofar as the pieces of legislation are concerned that govern the sector. As you also remember that we are in this process because a particular board was dissolved. Thereafter, there was an ad hoc committee put a report and recommendations. Can you please come in your own understanding with the turnaround strategy? With all that you know, what you have identified, given the fact that there was a report recommended some things to be done, how can you come in with your knowledge and skills to make sure that you do the right things? But also speak to the sector in particular. Thank you, Chair.
I mean, my diagnostics of what I've read, the bulk of the problem of SABC have very little to do with the Broadcasting Act or the broadcasting function, other than the two instances, for an example, which I've already quoted, where there was a decision not to flight violent sort of like kind of scenes, but also, you know, the 90-10, 20-80 split in terms of the content, local content and international content. A lot of issues had to do with general administration, corruption, maladministration, and mismanagement of things. That's the bulk of issues. So in my view, SABC does not lack the understanding of what needs to be done as an organization, but it was just a general lack of guidelines and governance. And that's the first thing that I will start with. Let's go back to basics. Let's make sure that the organization is run efficiently and effectively, adhering to the guiding principles. The second thing that I will do from a strategy perspective is to look at the relevancy of what SABC sell to its consumers, to the general public. I mean, we've got to understand whom we're competing with. You know, there's other providers of the same services that SABC is supposed to be providing. And I think they've moved a little bit ahead of us in a number of ways. We've got to repackage what we're about. But the third thing that we need to do and get right is to get the right people in the right jobs. There's been a lapse in appointing the right people with the right experience. And at the end of the day, it's about having the right team with the right expertise and the right competencies. The fourth thing that I think lacks, it's about partnerships. I mean, I've got experiences where SABC was not keen to partner on certain things. And when you partner, in my experience, you allow yourself to benefit from your partner because your partner will bring maybe money, and then you bring expertise. And the combination of money and expertise allow you to leverage from each other and create value and move forward. From a strategy perspective, that's what I would look at. But of course, because of how SABC is supposed to work, you've got to make sure that whatever you come up with, it's aligned with what governs you. So the Broadcasting Act will tell you what can be done and what can't be done. So because in the aspiration to commercialize and create value, you shouldn't be breaking law because that affects your ability to be long-term sustainable and also the reputation of the organization. So my limited understanding of the broadcasting field, like I've indicated that I'm not an expert in that field, but I do know that there is a Broadcasting Act which I've looked at. It talks about who's responsible for what needs to be done. But also there is a CASA, a regulator that we need to make sure that we fix the relationship with. There is a ministry who's responsible for, from a political perspective and from a policy perspective. All of these entities need to work together, but we've got to find each other in terms of what are the priorities, what do we need to focus on, and what we hope to gain from that. One of the things that lacks, which I pick up, is that, yes, there's lack of accountability, but also lack of consequences management. We've got to have people with performance management, sort of like performance contracts, so to speak, so that we can hold people accountable. Because if people are not held accountable, they tend not to pay attention to what they need to do. So at the end of the day, those are the things that I would look at and try to socialize it with all the stakeholders who are relevant to the success and how SABC needs to be run.
Specifically on the Broadcasting Amendment Act, we are in the process of amending it. And surely you have read it, and there are areas that you think you may make a contribution on. In those areas, or what are the areas that you think, in your view, you can make a contribution in amending this amendment, this Broadcasting Act?
So there's two amendments that for example, I saw that I paid attention to. It's the move in terms of the numbers from 12 to 9, which, if you look at the complexity of SABC, you do require cross-functional skills. So we need to make sure that the size of the board allows the organization to have that benefit of benefiting from a spectrum, a number of sort of skill sets. So reducing the number for me is a little bit of a challenge. There's also a point around making the minister responsible for appointing board members. And that for me can be limiting in a sense, because the recommendation is to have an advisory committee that will recommend or assist in identifying people that can be of assistance. And in my view, the current process is very open, very transparent. It allows the organization to attract people from all walks of life with different skill sets. But also the other thing is to allow the SABC to become more independent, because if you link it too much to politics, then it's basically start compromising the mandate of serving the general public without necessarily being biased to a particular political ideology. So for me, it's about also balancing the public agenda with the commercial agenda. There's been too much focus, in my assessment, on the public agenda, and we've sort of lacked on commercialization and making SABC able to generate the income that it needs to be more impactful in what they expected to do.
Thank you very much, Honorable Machoba.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to the committee. And relax, feel free, you are home. Mine, Chair, is to say your application came to our attention in the right time, where our SABC is ruined financially. Now, I hear you have a degree in teaching and you have equalities to fundraise for SABC. I want to know if you should be selected as a good candidate. How do you take to make sure that SABC is stable financially? A year, 2 years, 6 months? I just need that information. Lastly, Chair, SABC policies is as follows, is to treat everyone, part of society, with respect, not identify people solely by ethic, and to mention color only when it's relevant to the topic under discussion. What does that mean to you when you are part of the board in that policy I read for you? Lastly, Chair, also in terms of the policies, also talking about the disabilities for our society, I need a further explanation about the disabilities linking with the SABC board. How do you work on the disability issues as a board member in SABC? Let me stop there, Chair.
Thank you very much. 2 minutes to go.
To stabilize SABC, it would be unfair for me to say, put a time frame, because I'm not yet there, and I don't have the full understanding of what's really happening in the organization. Until I can get closer to that and review the strategy that is in place and where they are financially currently, it will be a little bit of a difficult one. But in my experience, it can take 2 years to turn around a business of SABC magnitude. The next question was around discrimination. If you look at the Broadcasting Act, sorry, it talks about leveraging our diversity and diverse cultures. And reality is, as a board, we've got to make sure that there is no discrimination, whether based on color, on race, or gender. And you touch on disability, that we've got to look at ways and means to reach out to people who may have disabilities that makes them not to access what SABC is about. So the digital migration, in my view, will allow us to address some of those issues. Like I said, that it provides about 16 channels where you can do different things, localize it, make it more regional. And in that instance, you can be able to customize things based on different needs, based on the challenges that our people may have.
Thank you. Honorable Kungubele.
Good afternoon, Bob Makhathini.
Good afternoon.
You know, the temptation when somebody listens to that eloquence is to say, can you share with us 1 or 2 concrete successes that we are able to verify based on your approach to issues of management? That's point 1. 2, there's a question that one has been keeping on asking here, the question of editorial independence and the fact that the charter keeps on saying the shareholder, who is a minister in this instance, is enjoined by law to articulate clearly the role of directors and board members, and in doing so try to manage a potential conflict of interest between the shareholders' regulatory responsibilities as government on the one hand and shareholders' responsibility on the other. Remember, the minister is a shareholder also leading government, but is a shareholder within the board with a particular responsibility. There is a contemplated conflict of interest here. So there's that independence and accountability, and also warning the shareholder on how to conduct him or herself. What would be your comment on those issues?
To comment on the last question, I'll go to the segregation of duties. To cater for the possible conflict of interest in the way you've explained it, that's why, in my view, you'll have almost 4 levels. You've got a management team, which is your CEO, COO, and Chief Financial Officer, being responsible for the day-to-day running. On top of that, you've got the board, all right, which is playing an oversight role, providing strategic direction. On top of that, then you've got a regulator, which is, in this case, maybe ICASA. You've got a minister who represents the shareholder in terms of government. Then you've got the president, basically also responsible for certain things. In businesses and how you segregate possible conflict of interest, you segregate roles, and you make that clear that you are responsible for this, so and so is responsible for this, and there is no overlap. In that way, it's one way of trying to make sure that you take care of that. But also, when the public is engaged when people are mobilized and they have an interest, it tends to hold authorities more accountable. Because when public is not engaged, the accountability lapses. And in my view, there is nothing new that we need. We just have to make sure that what we have, we adhere to, and we hold people accountable based on their mandate. And we've got to remind ourselves that SABC is there to serve the public. And whatever that is at the best interest of the public, that's what SABC is about. If you look at in 1994, when the new first CEO took over SABC, the first thing they had to do, they had to work on the credibility of SABC and make sure that SABC prioritizes the wants, the needs, and the aspirations of people, not a particular stakeholder within the ones that I've explained. So that's how I would look at it. You asked me a question in terms of what examples of success.
To deal with this matter, let me draw it again. The minister, who is a shareholder, plays two roles. When she puts the government cap, she regulates.
Yes.
But when she sits as a basic shareholder of 100%, she's a shareholder running she's got a role in the leadership of the board, of the SABC. So the question is that there is a potential conflict of interest there. There's a time she must act in the interest of the autonomy of the degree of autonomy of SABC. At the same time, she must act as a regulator. This is what is being articulated here. I'm not picking up your answer.
Okay.
9 seconds.
Okay, my answer was, if you look at what this ad hoc committee have done and the portfolio committee have done, they've been able to point things that were done wrongly by the minister. So in my view, I talk about this committee, for example, that is interviewing me, exercising its responsibility and holding the minister accountable. That's one way of balancing it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Honorable Vandam.
Thanks, Chairperson. Thank you for availing yourself, Mr. Makhathini. I mean, I think you've got a very impressive CV, and you seem to be very knowledgeable on the SABC as an organization. I'm interested in your board experience. I see you the chairperson of the Bongumusa Zuma Foundation, the president's wife. When were you appointed to that board, and how did the process of appointment happen?
Thank you. I was appointed to that board, I think, around about 2011, if I'm not mistaken. And how I came about being appointed, at the time, I was working for Accenture, or I just left Accenture, the consulting firm. And in that work at Accenture, I did a lot of strategy work, a lot of sort of like stakeholder management work. So one of the colleagues whom I used to work with was a member of the board. And they requested me to come and assist the foundation in structuring their strategy. So that's basically how I
So was there an application put out and then you applied, or were you just headhunted?
I was headhunted. There was no application process.
And then, so you said you've been on the board since 2011. There was a report in 2014 that the board had not submitted any financial statements since March 2012. Is that happening now? So is there kind of financial management in that board now?
Yes, the financial management is in place, and we do account for how the finances are working, and I've got sight of where the monies come from and how the monies are spent. Just to explain, that foundation is about diabetes and raising levels of awareness on the issues of diabetes. And we go around the country encouraging people to screen, helping people to understand the condition of diabetes, because it's one area that has not received enough attention in the public health space.
All right, and then I see you are nominated by Mountaintop Productions, a company owned by Mpumezi Mapasa, a company that does business with the SABC. What is your relationship with Mr. Mapasa?
Basically, he knows me as a business and a corporate guy. We're not related. So when I was working at SAB, they used to do a lot of work for us. I made an example of the underage program, which is called Future Leaders, which is flighted on SABC 1. He's the guy that produced that production for us. So that's when he got to know me, and from there he felt that I could be of value to the SABC board.
Thank you. Honorable Davis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Mr. Makhathini for making himself available. I just have a follow-up on the matter raised by my colleague on the Bongumusa Zuma Foundation. Is this not a conflict of interest, given the patron of that foundation's proximity to the president? And would you be prepared to resign from the board of the Bongumusa Zuma Foundation if you were appointed to the SABC board? I'm going to give my questions in succession, if you don't mind, and then you can answer. Is that okay? So that's the first one. Thanks. That's the first question. The second question is that on your CV, it says that you are the Director of Legal and External Affairs at British American Tobacco. I think another name for that is lobbyist. Is that not a potential conflict of interest? Given SABC's power, it's huge, massive power actually, to influence consumer behavior. And how would you manage that conflict of interest? Thirdly, I note in the interview process you have made quite a strong case that the SABC needs to focus more on the commercial aspect over the public aspect, as you put it. But the SABC has a public service mandate, and that mandate is to educate and inform as well as entertain, and that isn't always profitable. But that is why it's a public broadcaster, and that is why public money is used to partially fund the public broadcaster. So how do you propose that the SABC refocuses itself on the commercial aspect while at the same time carrying out its public service mandate? Thank you.
All right. In my tenure in corporate, whenever there is potential conflict of interest, you've got to take steps to mitigate that. So serving on an SABC board, for me, is important to benefit the country based on the skills that I've acquired over the 15-year tenure in corporate. So if there is proven conflict of interest with me serving in the Bongumusa Zuma Foundation and serving the SABC board, and that requires me to mitigate that and resigning as one of the solutions, I will consider that. Moving forward, on me being a director at BAT, British American Tobacco, in terms of what we do, you'll know that tobacco companies are no longer allowed to advertise. So the TPCA basically governs what we do. So there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that BAT wants to do as a business that will interfere with my role being in a board. My consideration to be part of the board was reviewed by the company and approved in that sense. But again, if you feel that there is stuff that makes this committee uncomfortable, I would really want to engage with that and see how we find the best way out of it. The third question was about me saying SABC needs to balance the commercial interest with the public interest. Remember, in terms of, it works in a three-tier. There is a public interest, public broadcaster, commercial, and there is community at the end. So there's three things that SABC needs to be doing. And we've got to find a way to balance all of these three things. I'm not saying that SABC should do away with public interest and just focus on the commercial. I gave an example of how else SABC can become more commercial. It is not sustainable for them to just sell airtime only. There is programs that they can produce themselves and get money from production at the same time selling airtime. But one of the things that, a lot of companies have got are expected to do a lot of stuff around socio-economic development. And socio-economic development is where corporates need to be doing things that are impactful in the broader sense of society. Targeting vulnerable groups, helping them, giving them tangible things that can help them become more commercial and help them to earn a livelihood to a certain extent. And I do think that SABC can look at that element and see what can they do to partner with these corporates servicing the public interest while at the same time making the money that they need to become more impactful and bigger in terms of the scale and the impact they can have.
Can you switch that one off? Honorable Matisha.
Thank you, Chairperson. South Africa is still a young democratic country, or a young democracy, as they put it. And I therefore wish to say that persons who get onto the board have got to nurture a democracy. And that implies inter alia that they must be committed to fairness, okay, to the freedom of expression of people. They must fight for the public to be properly informed, etc. Are you going to be able to do that? I'm saying this given the fact that that which we have experienced over a number of years past is contrary to that which we are attempting to attain at the moment. But secondly, if the chair were to allow me, and I want to come back, it's please prove to me that I am wrong when I put it to you that although you are answering questions like you are doing, very well, of course, okay? That is as a sequel to you having read, having prepared yourself properly. But then, the antithesis is the case in terms of you understanding each and every, area insofar as the laws, etc., of broadcasting are concerned. Are you able to prove me wrong? Just those two questions, and then I'm fine. Thank you, Chairperson.
To survive in corporate as a person, you've got to be very diligent, consistent, and be good in what you do over a longer period of time. If you look at my CV, I wouldn't be where I am if I lacked that diligence and hard work. The point around our democracy being young, I fully agree with it. That an SABC needs to understand that we still need to nurture and entrench our democracy. And part of doing that is to give a share of voice that allows every political party to have their voices heard, to allow public, ordinary South Africans in the deep rural of Eastern Cape or KZN to have a say and to benefit from an SABC. Failure to do that, it basically means that that public mandate, which is about educating, empowering, and to sort of like supporting our people, will not be realized. I am very, very cognizant of the fact that if I make it to the board, one of the responsibilities is to make sure that the credibility of SABC is improved and enhanced. And one way of doing that is to do what is expected of us as an organization. You asked a question about, I did sort of say when I started that I will not claim to be an expert in broadcasting. If you look at my CV, I've not really done much in it, except working with people who are doing production for me in different roles in my career. But every time when I got into a job, I spent the first few months basically making sure that I understand what is expected of me in that organization. When I was in the liquor space, which is a highly regulated entity, I had to focus on understanding the Liquor Act and know who are my stakeholders. I'm doing the same at BAT. When I get appointed to the board, I will have to understand the statute and the acts that govern what SABC needs to do so that I can then be able to play that oversight role and be effective in assisting, in guiding what needs to happen from an organizational perspective.
Thank you very much. The remaining time will be one follow-up between Honorable Van Dam and Honorable Davis, just one, and then one follow-up between Honorable Kungubele and Kalako. If you have a follow-up question or any question?
Thanks. Is it on? Thanks, Chair. How would you describe your relationship with the patron of the board you chair, and also with the rest of the members of that family? Have you met the president, for example? What's your relationship with Mrs. Zuma and the rest of the family?
My relationship with her, I'm the chair of the board. When she talks jokingly, she'll say, I'm one person who always threatened to fire her from her own foundation. This emanates from the fact that I understand my role there, that is to ensure that things are run properly. My reputation and credibility is important. I'm not a politician, and I'm not going to claim to be a politician. I'm a businessman who works in corporate. So for me to survive and be successful in my career, I need to make sure that my reputation is clean and is run in a very professional manner. I have a professional relationship with her. I haven't met the president. Basically, I've met him from, for example, when we have functions as a foundation, the president sometimes attend, and I will meet him like that. But I wouldn't say that because of me being the chair, there is anything that happens as a result of me playing a role in the foundation. Remember that this foundation is very linked to what I'm passionate about: educating people, empowering people. And like I've indicated, that it's about making sure that diabetes ceases to be a killer due to lack of awareness. And it was a platform where I could contribute and do something that can benefit general public.
That's the last follow-up, and then the last follow-up will be this side.
You said you discussed with your employer, with BAT, before you applied to be on the SABC board. Did you discuss with Mrs. Zuma before you applied to the SABC?
No, I didn't discuss it with her.
Thank you. Who's taking it? Honorable Kungubele?
Answer quickly that question. 2 or 3 concrete results of success. And 2, what would be your comments with regard to primacy of nation building in South Africa vis-a-vis the role of SABC?
In my job, one of the things that I'm accountable for is to ensure that we managed regulations and how we comply with those regulations in a manner that gives our business that I work for sustainability from a growth perspective. So when I was at SAB, I was responsible for, 1, compliance in terms of us adhering to the Liquor Act. Secondly, I was also responsible for making sure that what was bothering government is addressed. One of the things that government was concerned about was harm and lack of transformation. And if you look at what SAB did around the issue of harm, it bears testimony to the fact that I was able to balance what I would regard as commercial interest of SAB and what is important to government. The money that went towards underage drinking, fighting fetal alcohol syndrome, drinking and driving, and all of those things in all provinces is testimony that I was able to deliver something, understanding what is important to my shareholders and what's important to the regulators. That's one example that I can give. In the time when I was at Accenture, at some point, there was a difficult situation because when you do projects, there will be projects that go well, there will be those that don't go well. I was asked at some point to go work with a small client of ours, which had bought a piece of BP South Africa from commercial customers, which were then bought by this small company. My job there was to help them develop a company that will be able to deliver to the commitment to those people. And even today, I still have a good relationship with the guy who was the CEO. Yeah. So when it comes to nation building, SABC is the only channel or platform, let me talk about a platform, that is accessible to the millions of South Africans who don't have money, for example, to subscribe to pay TV. So at the end of the day, we can use SABC to build the nation, ensure that there is better understanding of diversity. And in my view, it is the only platform that actually can play a significant role in moving this nation forward.
Thank you very much. Any questions to members?
The question that I have is around the amendments that have been proposed.
Say it again.
Oh, I've been asked to ask a question.
Yes. Ask a question.
All right, my question is, there are amendments that have been made, and these amendments to the Broadcasting Act were done at the time where I think there was a bit of a disarray in terms of how the board operated, how the organization was run, and there was quite a high level of interference from the ministry side. Where are those amendments at the moment, and what is the position of this committee in some of those amendments?
No, maybe I should have said when I asked the question, you remember I asked the question, that what areas in the amendment bill that you may contribute to. The Broadcasting Amendment Bill is still in the committee. The committee is still dealing with it. That is why I want your view, so that you can contribute in that amendment bill. So it's still a work in progress within the committee. It will be done soon, but we would love to hear your ideas outside this interview.
It would be nice if I was allowed to have a follow-up question, but thank you very much.
No, do that. Come. Do that. Make a follow-up. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Makhathini, and thanks for your time. Thanks for your contribution. I really look forward to that contribution on Broadcasting Amendment Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is that the second candidate, Honorable Van Dam? Is that a candidate? This one?